Ever felt kind of weird ordering a giant slice of cake in public? Well, get this. Did you know that in Japanese culture, there's actually a really strong perception that sweets are primarily for women? It's true. A lot of Japanese men genuinely feel self-conscious about indulging in a sugary dessert while out and about. I wanted to start with this fascinating little anecdote from our source material today because it perfectly highlights something we all tend to forget. Our ideas about gender, how we express it, and the roles we play are deeply, deeply cultural. What feels totally natural in one part of the world might completely break the mold in another. Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm super excited to guide you through a really fascinating analysis of the source text in the Mirror of Culture, Understanding Gender. Today, we're going to look at a pretty thought-provoking contrast. We'll be examining the foundational ideas behind Western feminism and placing them right alongside the traditional, ancient philosophies of gender found in India. We're going to look directly at how history, philosophy, and spirituality shape these incredibly different worldviews. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with the roots of feminism, look at the Indian perspective, then explore women in Indian culture. After that, we'll compare equality versus equity, and finally, look at transcending gender consciousness. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the roots of feminism, challenging the hierarchy. So to really grasp modern Western gender dynamics, it's fascinating to look at how far back this societal programming goes. The source points us straight to Plato's Great Chain of Being. Think of this as a massive philosophical framework that organized literally all of life into a strict, divinely created top-down ladder. At the very top, you had God and angels, then humans, all the way down to the simplest animals. But crucially, within that human tier, there were subdivisions. Men were placed above women. The text argues that this framework was hugely influential in the West, socially and philosophically justifying gender inequality for centuries by implying that women's subordinate roles were just a natural part of the divine order. And because of that incredibly rigid, deeply entrenched hierarchy, Western feminism had to emerge as a direct challenge to those baked-in notions of inferiority. You see this starting with the term being coined in France in 1837, which led to the first wave of suffrage movements fighting for voting rights. Then, came the second wave in the 1960s, fighting for legal and social equality, followed by the third wave in the 90s, focusing heavily on individuality. The critical takeaway from the source here is that Western feminism nourished its roots specifically by pushing back against a very structured, rigid societal framework. The text suggests that taking these exact Western feminist movements and just dropping them into other countries that didn't share that same historical hierarchy without understanding the context, might actually be a categorical mistake. Which brings us to Section 2, the Indian perspective, harmony and complementarity.
Now, if the West's baseline was this strict top-down ladder, to understand the traditional Indian context, we have to look at something completely different, Samkhya philosophy. According to this ancient framework, the entire cosmic creation isn't a hierarchy at all. It's a combination of two eternal, indestructible elements. You have Prakriti, representing energy and femininity, and Purusha, representing consciousness and masculinity. Rather than one being superior to the other, Prakriti is the essential energy for Purusha. They are completely complementary, totally interdependent forces.
And this brilliantly illustrates that exact concept. The deity Ardhanarishwara is literally half female and half male, representing Shiva and Shakti. The explainer details how Shakti symbolizes femininity and Shiva symbolizes masculinity, but the real core message here is that every single individual holds both feminine and masculine elements within themselves. It visually communicates to society that women and men are naturally equal, holding distinct but absolutely essential roles in the cosmos that have to complement each other for existence to even continue. The source highlights a quote from spiritual leader Sri Mata Amritananda Mayadevi, better known as Amma, that just beautifully nails this idea. Men and women are of equal value, like two wings of a bird, for without the two in perfect harmony, humanity cannot progress. The text uses a really great metaphor here. Think of a complete electrical circuit. It absolutely relies on having both a positive and a negative pole, right? Life flowing at its fullest requires the contribution and presence of both genders working perfectly together.
Moving right along, Section 3, Women in Indian Culture, Rulers, Scholars, and Mothers.
So how did this philosophy actually translate into real life? Well, the text points out a really striking historical contrast. While European women were having to fight for basic access to education or the right to vote, Indian history shows a totally different trajectory. Historically, India was ruled by Rajnis, female rulers who led by birthright, like Dandi Mahadevi, or alongside their husbands, like Rani Lakshmi Bai. Plus, in the realm of education, India celebrated Brahmavadinis. These were female scholars and sages who pursued deep Vedic studies without facing gender bias. There was even the ancient practice of Swayambara, which granted women the right to choose their own partners. The source uses all these examples to demonstrate that Indian women held immense educational and political authority long before the advent of modern feminism. There's another really fascinating point the source makes, and this is regarding family structure. The text states that the traditional Indian family isn't just woman-centric, it's fundamentally mother-centric. Upon marriage, a woman became the grihini, effectively the empress of the home, completely taking charge of its values and major decisions. And this respect stems from a really deep reverence for divine femininity, which you see in concepts like Bhumata or Mother Earth. The source emphasizes that in this culture, motherhood itself is revered as the ultimate nourishing force of existence.
Let's put these side by side in Section 4, Equality versus Equity, a cultural contrast.
So the crucial point is how the source material contrasts these two deeply ingrained paradigms. According to the text, the Western pursuit of equality emerged specifically to fight off that entrenched inferiority we talked about earlier. But the source argues it often does so by promoting sameness, which the text suggests can actually risk the masculinization of women by erasing distinct gender traits. On the flip side, the text argues that traditional Indian equity focuses heavily on harmony. It celebrates diversity by recognizing distinct complementary roles, ultimately encouraging individuals to self-actualize based on their unique inner calling, rather than striving for an artificially constructed sameness.
And finally, Section 5, Transcending Gender Consciousness, the Spiritual Solution. So, how does all this ancient wisdom apply to the super complex gender discussions we're having today? Well, the explainer source touches on the modern gender complexities that are currently dominating cultural worldviews. According to the text, society today places a very heavy emphasis on identifying gender based on the mind rather than biology, including identifying as the opposite sex or even as otherkin. The source outlines that these shifting subjective identities are creating societal ambiguity and confusion. The text cites examples like biological males competing in women's sports or the prescribing of puberty blockers to physically healthy teenagers. The text presents these scenarios to argue that focusing so heavily on the physical and psychological labels of gender can actually make life's core purpose somewhat ambiguous. So what is the solution offered by the source? It's actually a profound spiritual pivot. Rather than hyper-focusing on physical or biological attributes, Sanatana Dharma teaches individuals to identify with their true self, the Atman. Now, the Atman is formless. It has no attributes, no ego, no beginning, and no end. In this philosophy, your physical body, and whatever gender is attached to it, is simply viewed as an instrument. It's just a temporary vehicle meant to help you evolve spiritually, rather than the absolute final definition of who you are. And the explainer source backs this up with some pretty powerful mythological examples, where physical gender is transcended effortlessly. We see stories of Lord Vishnu taking the female form of Mohini, or Parmeswara literally taking the form of a mother to help a devotee deliver a baby, or even the great warrior Arjuna disguising himself as Brahmanala. Even the Bhagavad Gita promotes the idea that a truly well-rounded personality has to balance both masculine and feminine qualities internally. These stories are used to prove the source's point. In this tradition, true identity goes vastly beyond mere physical form. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought directly from the source material. Is our existence and reality really restricted to our physical body? It's a powerful question to chew on, right? Does true harmony in society come from fighting over physical labels and biological boundaries? Or does it come from seeking that inner self, that formless Atman, and recognizing that at our absolute core, we all share a common, unified essence? It's a deeply profound perspective on gender that definitely leaves us with a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.